Hi, this is Nicole with Cutting Edge Crafts, and today I'm going to be working with the new Durabright Opaque Black Film from Grafix. If you're familiar with Yupo paper, this is very similar. It's non-absorbent and it works great with alcohol inks. One side of the paper is smooth and the other side has a slightly rougher texture. You can use either side, but today I'm going to be working on the rough side. The sheet that I'm working with is 9 by 12. I'll start by trimming my sheet down into 4/4. This will leave me with pieces that are 4.5 inches by 6 inches. This is slightly larger than what my finished card size will be, so I will have enough room to apply my color and still be able to trim the piece down however I need to. I'm going to be working with Ranger alcohol inks in Butterscotch and Sienna. I am using an ink blending sponge and a 90% rubbing alcohol with a tiny bit of vegetable glycerin as a blending solution. Because these inks are translucent, I will also need to add an opaque mixative so that it will show up on my paper. For this example, I will be using the Snowcap mixative, but you could also use a metallic. Before I add any color, I am using a brick pattern embossing folder to add a brick texture to my card base. I want the grout to be the part that is raised up, so I'm placing the textured side of my paper to the back of the embossing folder. Now I just need to run the folder through my die cutting machine, and I'll end up with a nice texture to my card base that I can add my colors to. Okay, now you can see that the grout texture is raised up a little bit, and where the embossing folder puts stress on the paper, the film lightens a little. It's a pretty cool tone-on-tone effect, and I may end up using simple embossing on future cards. I'm adding a few drops of my rubbing alcohol and glycerin solution to my sponge, and then I'll add a few drops each of my colors without overlapping any of them very much. The Snowcap mixative will give me just enough opacity for the inks to show up on my paper. With my blending sponge, I'm pouncing the inks onto my card front. You can see that it gives a pretty nice variation in the color. Once it dried a little bit, and it dries pretty fast, I decided that I wanted to add a little more variation in the color, so I went back in with a few more drops of each of the inks. My sponge was still a little bit wet from the first application, so this time I didn't add any additional blending solution. And you can see it gave me a little bit more variation in the color because the colors didn't blend very much on the sponge. Once I was happy with the color application, I let it dry a little bit, and then I took a sanding block. You can pick one of these up from your local hardware store. And I just started to sand some of the color off of the raised grout lines that my embossing folder imprinted on my paper. You can see that the black of the film starts to show through as I sand. It gives it this really cool three-dimensional effect that I just love. This material is very durable, so you can sand it down quite a bit and it's not going to rip or tear through the paper like you might have happen with a regular cardstock. It's also worth noting that the paper didn't absorb any of the ink, so you can easily get it right back to its original color. Once you have it sanded down to your liking, you can really see the awesome texture and dimension of the pattern. Okay, now I'm going to trim the panel I just finished down to create a card, and I'll have a little bit extra for a simple bonus card. I am starting with a piece of 110-pound Kraft colored cardstock that I have pre-trimmed to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I've also trimmed my emboss panel down to 2 3/4 by 5 1/2, and I'll be positioning that to the left side of my card front. I'm using a sheet of Grafix Artist-tac to cover the back side of my panel with adhesive. This adhesive has become one of my absolute favorites for card making because of how easy it is to turn basically any shape you want into a sticker. All you have to do is remove a little piece of the release paper and press your piece down into the adhesive. The whole back side of the piece will be coated in a dry adhesive that is similar to what you get with a tape runner. I have prepped the rest of the pieces I'll be using on this card with my Cricut Maker. If you're interested in that layout file, check out the link in my Instagram bio. Using an embossing ink pen, I had my machine draw out the sentiment that says, "Whine a little, laugh a lot." and then I heat embossed it on the same material I used for the panel I created earlier. This material holds up well to a heat embossing gun and doesn't tend to warp. I also cut out some wine glasses on plain white cardstock with my machine and hand colored them in with Spectrum Noir alcohol ink pens. Once I had a good idea of how I wanted my card layout, I covered the back side of my heat embossed sentiment panel with Artist-tac, and I adhered it to a frame made from plain white cardstock. I used a couple of large foam dots to pop up the sentiment over the brick pattern. You could also use foam tape or even add adhesive to some fun foam if you're worried about the back of the sentiment strip being fully supported for mailing. Using white and silver alcohol inks, I used my ink blender again to add some color to a black doily shape that I had cut from black film. After I dabbed the color on, I decided that it was a little too white, so I decided to go back in with some Butterscotch ink because I felt like the warmer tone went better with my color scheme. It's easy to go back in and layer on additional colors, and if you really don't like your color application, you can take rubbing alcohol and wipe the entire panel clean to start over. Once I was happy with my colors, I added some jute twine to the back of my doily and adhered it to the front of my card. Then, to finish my layout, I took a couple more foam dots and added them to the backs of my wine glasses so that I could pop them up on the front of my card. I also cut another dot in half and supported the stems of the glasses as well. Now that my card front's finished, all I need to do is add it to my card base. I covered the entire front of my card base in Artist-tac, and that let me quickly create a surface that I could line up with the front of my card and stick it down. Okay, now that I'm finished with my first card, I'm going to get started on my bonus card. I'm covering a piece of black fun foam that I have trimmed to 1 1/4 by 4 3/4 with Artist-tac. I'm going to stick it to the back of the leftover piece of embossed brick that I have trimmed down to 1 1/2 by 5. Then I'm going to take that whole piece and cover the back of it in Artist-tac as well. I'm going to add that to the right side of a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 side folding note card. Then I'm going to take my 2" by 2" sentiment strip that I have pre-printed with a sentiment that reads, "Good friends wine together," and cover the back of it in adhesive as well. After I add it to the front of my card, I'm also going to glue a 2" by 2 3/4" purple rectangle to the card front. This is where I'm going to place my wine glass. This arrangement leaves me a nice clean 1/4" border around all the sections of my card, and you can see how quickly it comes together. Now all I have left to do is add the wine glass. I'm covering the back of the wine glass with adhesive and then using black fun foam for dimension. I'm using scraps of foam, so I'm just trimming away the excess so that it's a little bit smaller than my glass. Once I have it all covered, I'll add more adhesive to the back of the foam and I can place it on the front of my card. Well, that's all I have for today. I hope that you enjoyed this collaboration with Grafix Arts. Make sure to follow Cutting Edge Crafts on Instagram and check out this fun new product.